that target before I lose my mind! I have seen children at county fairs shoot better than this!
Somebody hit that target before I lose my mind! Sergeant Decker's voice cracked across the range like a bullwhip. 23 recruits stood in a line, rifles trembling in their hands, brass casings scattered at their feet like confetti after the worst party ever thrown. Not a single silhouette downrange had been touched. Not one. Decker paced behind them, veins bulging in his neck, clipboard crushed in his fist. I have seen children at county fairs shoot better than this. Children, with pellet guns. And then, from behind the line, from the direction of the mess tent where the smell of powdered eggs still hung in the morning air, a voice spoke. Quiet, calm, almost apologetic. Sergeant, mind if I take a few shots? Every head turned. Standing there in a grease-stained apron, wiping his hands on a rag, was Gerald Mackey. 64 years old, the base cook. The man half these recruits had mocked that very morning for burning the toast. Decker stared at him like he had just asked to pilot a fighter jet. You? Get back to your kitchen, old man. But Gerald didn't move. He just stood there, quiet as a stone, looking downrange with eyes that didn't belong on a man who scrambled eggs for a living. If you believe that respect is earned in silence and proven when it matters, comment the word marksman right now. Because this story is about to change everything you think you know about the man behind the serving line. Gerald Mackey had been cooking on Fort Whitmore for 11 years. He arrived in 2012, a quiet man with a slight limp and a duffel bag that looked older than most of the recruits he would eventually feed. Nobody asked where he came from. Nobody asked about the limp. He applied for the civilian cook position through a Veterans Affairs employment program, and the base accepted him without much fanfare. He was given a small room near the kitchen, a set of uniforms 2 sizes too big, and a schedule that started at 4 a.m. And Gerald never complained. Not once. He showed up before dawn, brewed the coffee, prepped the oatmeal, laid out the trays, and stood behind the counter with a quiet nod for every soldier who passed through. Most didn't acknowledge him. Some made jokes. The younger recruits especially treated him like furniture, something that existed in the background, functional but invisible. They called him Pops when they were being kind and the old dishwasher when they weren't. Gerald absorbed it all with the same expression, a faint half smile that never quite reached his eyes. He walked slowly, spoke softly, and never drew attention to himself. If you passed him in the hallway, you might not even notice. And that was exactly the way Gerald wanted it, because Gerald Mackey was hiding something. Not in a box under his bed or in a file locked in a drawer. He was hiding it in plain sight, behind every quiet nod, every slow shuffle, every burned piece of toast he didn't bother defending. What Gerald carried wasn't in his hands. It was in his history. The morning of the incident started like every other morning on the range. Sergeant First Class Ray Decker had been assigned a fresh cycle of recruits, 18 to 22-year-olds, most of whom had never held a weapon before enlisting. Decker was a career instructor, 15 years on various bases, known for being loud, impatient, and brutally effective. He didn't coddle, he didn't repeat himself, and he absolutely did not tolerate incompetence. The qualification course was standard, targets at 50, 100, and 200 meters. Recruits were expected to hit a minimum threshold to proceed. By mid-morning, not a single recruit had come close. Shots went wide, went high, hit dirt. One private somehow managed to jam his weapon 3 times in 10 minutes. Decker's patience disintegrated round by round. He pulled recruits aside one at a time, correcting grips, adjusting stances, shouting breathing techniques that no one could absorb under the pressure of his voice. "You're wasting government ammunition," he bellowed at one point. "Every round you miss costs taxpayer money. You are personally bankrupting this country one trigger pull at a time." Gerald had been delivering water and boxed lunches to the range, a routine task he handled twice a week. He set the cooler down near the observation bench and lingered, watching the recruits cycle through their positions. His eyes moved in a way that didn't match his posture. His body looked tired, old, stiff, but his eyes tracked the shooters with a precision that no one noticed. No one except maybe Decker, who caught Gerald standing a little too still, a little too focused, a little too close to the firing line. "Hey, Mackey," Decker barked without looking up from his clipboard. "Chow's delivered. You can head back." Gerald nodded but didn't move right away. He watched one more recruit fire a string of 5 rounds. All 5 missed. The recruit cursed and slammed the rifle down. Decker stormed over. "Pick that weapon up. You don't slam a rifle, ever. You treat it with respect or you don't touch it at all." The recruit mumbled an apology. Gerald stepped forward then, just one step, and said it again. "Sergeant, I could demonstrate a few shots if it would help." Decker turned slowly. The range went quiet. 23 recruits, 2 range safety officers, and a supply clerk all stared at the old cook in the apron. Decker let out a sharp breath through his nose. "Mackie, I appreciate the enthusiasm, but this isn't a game. These are live rounds, not soup ladles." A few recruits snickered. One whispered something about letting Grandpa play soldier. Gerald didn't react. He just looked at Decker with that same calm, that same unsettling stillness. "I understand, Sergeant. I'm qualified. DD-214 is on file if you want to check. I just thought a visual demonstration might help the young ones see what a proper shot sequence looks like." Decker frowned. Something in the way Gerald said proper shot sequence caught his ear. Cooks didn't talk like that. Retirees who missed the old days didn't talk like that. That was language from someone who had lived behind a scope. Against every instinct telling him to send the old man back to his eggs and coffee, Decker made a decision he would remember for the rest of his career. "Fine. Lane 4. Show me what you've got." Gerald removed his apron and folded it neatly on the bench. He walked to lane 4 without hurrying, each step measured and deliberate. A range safety officer handed him a standard M4 carbine. Gerald took it without fumbling, without hesitation. He checked the chamber, inspected the bolt carrier group, and shouldered the weapon in one fluid motion that took less than 3 seconds. The recruits watched with mild amusement. A couple pulled out phones, expecting to record something funny. Decker stood behind Gerald with his arms crossed, already regretting the decision, already composing the sentence he would use to politely dismiss the old man after his inevitable miss. "Whenever you're ready, Mackie." Gerald didn't answer. He settled into a position that looked different from anything the recruits had been taught. His breathing changed, his shoulders dropped. His left hand cradled the handguard with a grip that was loose, but perfectly controlled. And then he became still. Not just motionless, still. The kind of still that doesn't come from relaxation. It comes from years of training your body to disappear behind the rifle, to become nothing but the line between the barrel and the target. The first shot broke the silence like a crack of thunder. Downrange, the 50-meter target snapped backward. Dead center. Before the sound had fully registered, Gerald fired again. The 100-meter target dropped, then the 200. 3 rounds, 3 hits, all center mass. The time elapsed was under 5 seconds. Nobody laughed. Nobody spoke. The range existed in a vacuum of stunned silence for what felt like a full minute, but was probably only a few seconds. Gerald lowered the weapon, cleared the chamber, and set it on the bench with the same care a surgeon places an instrument back on its tray. He turned to Decker. "Breathing is the whole thing, Sergeant. They're holding their breath when they should be releasing between heartbeats. That's why they're pulling left and high." Decker's mouth was open, but no words came out. He stared at Gerald, then at the targets, then back at Gerald. One of the range safety officers, a young corporal named Stein, had already moved downrange to inspect the targets. He came jogging back, breathless. "Sergeant Decker, all 3 center. I mean dead center. The 200-meter shot is inside a 2-inch grouping." Decker blinked. A 2-inch grouping at 200 meters with an M4 offhand, no bipod, no rest, no scope. That wasn't good marksmanship, that was something else entirely. "Mackie," Decker said slowly, his voice stripped of all its earlier bluster. "Who are you?" Gerald offered that half-smile again. But this time something behind it shifted. Something old and deep. Something that had been locked away behind 11 years of coffee pots and serving trays. "Just a cook, Sergeant." But Decker wasn't buying it anymore. He pulled out his phone and made a call. 20 minutes later, a black SUV pulled up to the range gate. The door opened and out stepped Colonel Vivian Hale, the base commander. Walked directly to Gerald, who was standing off to the side, apron back on, sipping water like nothing had happened. The recruits watched in complete confusion. Base commanders didn't come to qualification ranges. They certainly didn't come for cooks. Colonel Hale stopped in front of Gerald and looked at him for a long moment. Then she extended her hand. "Gunnery Sergeant Mackie, it's been a long time." The words hit the air like a detonation. Every recruit, every officer, every person on that range felt the ground shift under the weight of what had just been said. Gunnery Sergeant. Not Mr., not Gerald, not Pops. Gunnery Sergeant. Gerald shook her hand and nodded. Colonel, you've done well for yourself. Hale didn't smile. Her expression was something closer to reverence. I was a second lieutenant in Kandahar in 2004, green as grass. My convoy got pinned in an ambush outside a village we had no business being in. RPG took out our lead vehicle. We were sitting in a kill zone taking fire from 3 directions. I was frozen. She paused. The range was so quiet you could hear the wind pushing through the dry grass behind the berms. And then a single rifle started firing from a rooftop 400 meters north. 1 shot, 1 drop, over and over. 12 confirmed shots in 90 seconds. The ambush collapsed. We got out. Every single one of us got out. She looked at Gerald. That was you. Gerald said nothing. He looked at the ground for a moment, then at the distant tree line beyond the range, as if he could still see that rooftop, that village, that day frozen in amber somewhere behind his eyes. Colonel Hale continued, her voice steady but carrying an emotion she made no effort to hide. Gunnery Sergeant Gerald Mackey served 26 years in the Marine Corps. He completed 7 deployments across 3 theatres. He was a scout sniper attached to 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines, and later served as a senior instructor at the Scout Sniper School in Quantico. His record includes over 90 confirmed engagements across Iraq and Afghanistan. He received the Silver Star, 2 Bronze Stars with Valor devices, and a Purple Heart for wounds sustained in Helmand Province in 2010, which is where that limp comes from. She turned to Decker. The man you've had making scrambled eggs is one of the most decorated snipers in modern Marine Corps history. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thick, weighted with the shame of 100 small cruelties, 100 jokes about burned toast and slow walking, and an old man who didn't matter. Every recruit who had ever looked past Gerald at the chow line, every soldier who had laughed about the cook who couldn't even get the coffee right, stood in that silence and felt the full measure of what they had failed to see. Decker was the first to move. He stepped forward and did something no one expected. He stood at attention and delivered a crisp parade ground salute. Not the casual kind tossed off in hallways. The real kind. The kind that means something. Gerald looked at him, surprised, maybe for the first time that day. Then slowly, almost reluctantly, he returned it. One by one, the recruits followed. Some didn't know the protocol. Some weren't even sure if they were supposed to salute a retired Marine on an army base. But they did it anyway, because some things transcend regulation. They salute because they mean it. Corporal Stein, who had inspected the targets, stood rigidly at attention with tears running down his face that he made no effort to wipe. "Turn down every invitation," said he. "Turn down every invitation," said he didn't do it for medals or applause. She looked at Gerald. "But I think it's time people knew." Gerald shook his head gently. "I cook breakfast, Colonel. That's enough." But Hale wasn't asking any more. She had already submitted the paperwork. In the weeks that followed, things changed at Fort Whitmore. Slowly at first, and then all at once. Gerald's story moved through the base like a quiet earthquake. Soldiers who had ignored him for years started stopping by the mess hall, not just for food, but to sit with him, to listen, to ask questions about things they were afraid to ask anyone else. Recruits from the qualification range requested that Gerald assist with marksmanship coaching. Decker, to his credit, didn't just allow it. He formally requested Gerald be designated as a civilian marksmanship consultant, a role that was approved within the month. Gerald still cooked. He still showed up at 4 a.m, brewed the coffee, and laid out the trays. But now, 2 afternoons a week, he walked to the range in a clean polo shirt with his old USMC cap on his head, and he stood behind young soldiers and taught them what no classroom ever could: how to breathe, how to be still, how to find the calm inside the noise. And he never raised his voice, not once. He just stood there, patient and quiet, the same way he had stood behind the serving counter for 11 years, and he showed them. The scores on that base improved 30% in the first quarter. Decker later told a colleague it was the single best thing that ever happened to his program. There is a man on every base, in every workplace, in every neighborhood, who carries more than you can see. The scars are hidden under rolled-up sleeves. The medals are in boxes that never get opened. The stories sit behind quiet eyes and half smiles that never fully form. We walk past these people every day, and we decide in the span of a glance that we know who they are. We decide they are old. We decide they are slow. We decide they are nothing more than what we can see in that single careless moment. And then one day, the truth comes out. Not because they wanted it to, but because the moment demanded it. And suddenly we realize that the person we dismissed was the one who saved lives, who carried weight we cannot imagine, who chose silence over spectacle because the ones who have truly seen the worst rarely feel the need to talk about it. Gerald Mackey never asked for recognition. He never corrected anyone who called him Pops. He never once mentioned Kandahar or Quantico, or the rooftop where he saved an entire convoy with 12 rounds and a steady hand. He just made breakfast. And he made it with the same discipline, the same quiet excellence, the same unshakable calm that once made him one of the deadliest marksmen his branch had ever produced. If this story reminded you that respect is owed before it is explained, subscribe to this channel because every story we tell is about the people the world overlooked and the moments that proved the world wrong.